Hello there, and welcome to AGRC 221 Ag Marketing. This video lecture series will be a three-part series here in Unit 2, where we're going to talk about on-farm grain drying and storage, its role, a few methods, and a few keys to on-farm storage and keeping your grain in great condition, and the role it will play in grain merchandising. So when we look at our objectives here, we'll quickly zoom past this because I don't want to waste too much time here on the video. You're welcome to pause the video and look at the objectives, but let's get to the content. So when we review the content, the keys to grain drying is, of course, we need to remove some of the moisture from the grain by mechanically moving air through it some way after the grain is harvested. And natural field drying really will only get you so far, and especially dependent upon the fall that we have and how early the crop matures. The crop will give up moisture to the air until it reaches an equilibrium point. And then after that, depending on where we are in the year, it's just not going to get any drier in the field. And so if you're going to get your crop out, occasionally we have to utilize some kind of application of on-farm grain drying in order to get it dry enough before you deliver it to the elevator. If you don't, you're probably going to incur a significant amount of moisture dock at the elevator, as they'll have to then do the same thing, run it through their dryer in order to keep grain in good condition in storage. So the longer you get into harvest and any delays that we exist, and we've had a few over the last few years, obviously makes air drying in the field, which is obviously the cheapest option, makes it much harder and much less reliable. Some advantages to utilizing on-farm drying and storage. Of course, we can increase the quality of the harvested crop by reducing crop weather exposure. If you anticipate poor weather conditions, you can get at it a little bit sooner, knowing that you're going to put that in the bin and dry it mechanically. Hopefully you reduce harvest loss as well. As you harvest grain wetter, you lose a lot less on the head or through the combine out the back because of less head shattering and, of course, much less cracked kernels, as long as you don't let it go or get at it too wet. Also, we can reduce dependency upon good weather conditions for harvest. We reduce the size and or number of combines that harvest-related equipment that we need, as well as labor. If we stretch out the window, we can probably get a lot more acres out of that same equipment and that same labor, and allows a lot more time for post-harvest work. If we can get at our harvest sooner, planning on going ahead and drying it, considering that that's maybe the more economical option. If you need to do fall tillage, you can get at that in a little bit timelier fashion. Of course, some disadvantages is it takes some pretty good investment in drying equipment and annual cost of ownership. It's not a cheap investment, and we'll be considering when we go into class and do some of our activities, what does it cost to build a grain bin, just for storage, and then of course what might it cost to put in a dryer. But it is a significant original investment, and you have to have space on the operation in order to erect these structures. Of course, you'll also have to add in the operating costs for fuel, electricity, and they aren't labor-free. You do have to pay attention to them. You'll see an example in a video later on. And extra grain handling may result in further investment of equipment. As these structures grow, you tend to add pieces to the puzzle and add more storage as well. So methods of storage, we can look at types of dryers, and we're going to dissect each and every one of these. You can look at natural air and low temperature drying, layer drying, high temperature bin drying, column dryers and combination drying, and then dryeration or in storage cooling methods in order to keep grain in condition. That's the most important thing, is we have to get grain in the correct condition at the correct moisture. So starting first with natural air or low temperature drying, some advantages here is really no harvest bottleneck, because we're not ever going to be waiting on a dryer or a batch flow dryer or something like that. You're going to fill the bins at the harvest rate as quickly as those trucks show up. So all you really have to do is properly size the system um, to keep up with the combine, essentially, because you're going to dry the crop at a pretty economical rate, and it's cheaper than high temperature. Disadvantages, of course, you can't get at your crop very wet. There's a limitation to amount of just natural air and low temperature drying, meaning just blowing a fan through the bin, that you can effectively dry it. If you go in at too high a moisture, 25, 26, 27% moisture, some of the higher end that you'll see people start harvesting nowadays, you're not going to effectively get that moisture out of there quick enough before your grain starts to go out of condition. And of course, it needs a significant amount of electrical power to do that, to keep those dryer fans going. Here's an example of a typical bin dryer using natural airflow. Not necessarily a heater on it, but there could be. And so in this method, you would have a fan sucking air in from the outside. You would probably have the driest grain on the bottom. Then your drying zone kind of moves up. It's about a 1 to 2 foot layer in there, and then the wettest grain at the top with exhaust vents on the top of the bin, which is kind of how those work. And again, probably the cheapest method. We could go to layer drying, where you plan out which varieties are coming out of the field, and a little bit of an opposite approach, of course, as you see to the harvest moistures, where you maybe put your wettest corn on the bottom, and then as you proceed to either different varieties or extended time through harvest time, the drier corn goes on the top. So it takes a little bit of planning to layer it up like that, but the airflow is going to be very similar. A fan to the bottom of the bin, sucking air in and blowing it up through a perforated floor up through and drawing it through your grain layers, which is what we refer to as layer drying. So you can get a little bit more aggressive with your higher harvest moisture because, number one, it's going to mix a little bit. And so you can have that advantage, but your disadvantage is you kind of may restrict yourself from a harvesting schedule, as you have to be very closely planned out. And if you get to the point where it's a little bit too wet, the corn going in the top, you may have to slow down. That's going to wrap up segment 1 for this video series on on-farm grain drying and storage. We'll resume and talk about more drying systems in segment 2.